So finding direction in life can be tough. There are what are called divine messengers in Buddhist tradition, and they are old age, sickness, death, and the seeing of a mendicant, which is symbolic of someone who is a practitioner of Dharma, really, someone who is trying to penetrate appearances and see more deeply into the way things are. So these are the four signs of truths that, are really beyond dispute. Old age, sickness, and death kind of puts a spanner in the works when it comes to planning our life. Because whatever our aspirations and plans are, that tends to sort of dampen the enthusiasm. So how do we make sense and meaning out of a life that is characterized by this truth, the truth of old age, sickness, and death? And what is this fourth divine messenger? What is the presence of that divine messenger about? Well, we don't need to be a Buddhist to contemplate this, but what the Buddhist tradition is saying is that there is this potential, this seed potential planted deep in the core of our being that for the majority of us is not fully realized or is not fully grown and has not fully come into being. But if that seed potential is fully realized, does fully grow, does fully come into being, then there is this awakening of a sense of being in the universe in such a way as old age, sickness, and death lose their power to define and sour and overshadow our lives and the plan for our lives. In fact, it becomes nutriment for a kind of process of tending to an interior garden, a garden space that enriches the soil of that garden. And so in a sense, when rightly understood, just like manure, which is not something that you would want to have in your house or something that you'd want to obviously have on your person, but manure, rightly understood and rightly used, actually becomes the ground of the enriching of the soil, and the soil produces the food that we eat, and that nourishment fuels all life. So this is very foundational, understanding these very core foundational and sort of earthy matters, really. Old age, sickness, and death. This is something we all share in common and something that is problematic for us all. So the Buddhist tradition is saying that there is this potential for living in such a way as we turn that specter into nutriment. And then when that becomes nutriment, we're really on a path of awakening. And what I mean by awakening is an illumination of all things with the light of awareness. And that light of awareness is in a constant dance of intersubjectivity and the emergence of the new and the knowing of the new and the disappearance and reappearance in a process of constant enriching through the you could say the continuous revelation of that light of knowing. And that light awakens in the head, it awakens throughout the body, it awakens in the heart. So in the head it produces a quality of stillness and lucidity, where the thinking mind ceases to be dominant, ceases to be the dominant force of understanding, and a more intuitive, clear and still mind produces produces the spontaneous arising of wisdom in surprising and novel ways. And then when it comes to the heart, the whole emotional body is gradually transformed into the four immeasurables, radiances, which are compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, and loving kindness. These are the radiances of the emotional body that come into being and become manifest as we become more and more attuned. So there's this total reorganization, you could say, of our sense of being, our sense of how we are related to all things and to others. But none of this happens just by accident. We have to, and we can choose to, intentionally understand how to cultivate the garden. So the thing that really determines outcomes is karma. Karma is a word that's entered the sort of lexicon, is a commonly used word. Sometimes it's thought of as, karma is a bad thing that's somehow determined in some way that we may not understand. But in Buddhism, the word karma really just means action. With every action we make, either of body, speech, and mind, we plant a seed. And just like if we plant a seed of rice or we plant an acorn, that seed of rice will grow in the future, and that acorn will grow in the future. So there's three types of karma. There's positive, neutral, and negative. Now, we have the option of choosing what comes out of our mouth. We have the option of choosing how we act. We have the option of making an infinite number of choices either way. So there's plenty of rope either to hang ourselves or to learn to grow a beautiful garden. And this is one of the wonderful things about being a human being. And really what karma really amounts to at the end of the day, in my estimation, is that certain types of actions distance us more and more from accessing this illumined core, from growing into closer and closer association with it until we reach such a point as it becomes self-evident. So it creates veils of darkness, really, that are hard to penetrate, veils that cause us distress, anxiety, confusion, bewilderment, self-doubt, self-hatred, all the rest of it. So all these sort of very intense movements of mind that interfere with and make it difficult for us to settle into centered sensitivity to the way things are, because everything is just too jangled, too busy up there. There's just too much shaking and movement, and this is basically what negative karma does. For example, when I was a young child, I shot a robin with an air gun. I didn't expect to hit it, but I hit it and killed it. And so there's a karma associated with that. And I remember in the monasteries, when you do a lot of meditation, suddenly the memory comes up, and still it's a painful memory. So there's pain associated with that, and then when that pain arises, then it's more hard or more difficult for me in that moment to be still and be settled and be content, and to know the means by which I can cultivate and discover and sustain that stillness, that contentment. So just, this is one example of a negative karma. If you catch a fish and then you unhook it and place it back into the water and let it swim away, that's one karma. If you catch a fish, unhook it, and then take a rock and knock its brains out, then that's another karma. So then, this is a seed you planted. Then when you're sitting on the meditation cushion and you're beginning to open up and your deeper sensitivity starts to grow, the memory of letting the fish go will be a pleasant memory that will help you settle and will bring a sense of expansion and well-being, whereas the memory of killing the fish will do the opposite. It will cause you to contract, and because the deepest sensibility of our hearts is not to kill. So how do we sort of navigate all this material? The Buddha did actually give us frameworks to help us navigate this, and he called them the 5 great gifts. And in these times of general ambiguity about how things work and my personal freedoms, etc., these 5 great gifts are perhaps quite good to reflect on, because they do serve as a standard against which we can begin to consider this situation that we find ourselves in, this situation of mind-boggling potential for awakening, and the situation of incredible potential for creating pain and confusion and distress in the world, which is very much the case as we look at the world at large. We can see there's just a huge amount of injustice, pain, cruelty, hatred, distress, mental illness, mental disease. All of this is the result of karmas. All of this is the result of actions that we've made. So these 5 precepts that the Buddha is pointing to, he called them the 5 gifts. And this is what he had to say. He said, there are these 5 great gifts: original, long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, that are not open to suspicion and will never be open to suspicion, and are unfaulted by knowledgeable contemplatives and Brahmins. So these 5 precepts actually predate Buddhism, and they weren't created by the Buddha, they were discovered by the Buddha. They're very ancient principles, so we can, I guess we can to a certain extent trust that there's something of value there to at least consider and to start using as a measure against which we can begin to look at our behavior, our actions of body, speech, and mind, and then start to reflect on what fruits do they bring, what's the vipaka karma, they call it, the resultant karma. So what are these 5 precepts? Maybe we should have a quick run through of them, and I'll just quickly maybe chant the Pali. And actually, before I do that, I think it's worth remembering that before anyone takes the 5 precepts, we actually take the 3 refuges prior to taking the 5 precepts. So what does that mean? I mean, if you're not a Buddhist, you're probably not interested. But there's a principle there that extends way beyond Buddhism, that is universal, really. So in a sense, when we take the 3 refuges, it's Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So we do that 9 times, but I won't subject you to the 9. But when we take those 3 refuges, we're basically saying, well, I take refuge in this potential for this powerful awakening that is going to radically turn my sense of how I'm positioned in the universe inside out. So I'm no longer just feel that the body determines who and what I am, but that I become, in a sense, identified with the awakened consciousness of being, the source condition, the deep lake of being that transcends the arising and passing away, which transcends the birthing and deathing of conditions. So I can locate the being that is, in a sense, the giver and the receiver of conditions as they arise and pass away. I can I can know the wave and know the cessation of the wave and be the ocean all simultaneously at the same time. So this is just a whole completely different way of configuring things. So I take refuge in that potential. I wish to try and aspire to realize it. So then there is the Dharma, which are the principles of nature that when we associate with them, enable this awakening to occur. So we come into a place where we naturally attune, realize, and come to know the truth of what is fundamentally hearsay for the majority of us. So I'm taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma. So the Buddha said, he who sees the Buddha sees the Dharma, he who sees the Dharma sees the Buddha. So there's like the front and back of a hand. And then the Sangha is, I then also wish to associate myself with the human beings who have some sense of how to actualize this or embody it in society, in this human realm. And so through association with those people, by way of osmosis, by way of transmission, may I pick up some of the truths of how this is realized. So it's like the physical, it's like Buddha Dharma made manifest in relationship with humans, basically. So this is the Sangha. So I take refuge in these 3 principles. I have an interest in making meaning and sense out of it and knowing for myself whether this hearsay actually turns out to be the case. And so I take those 3 refuges. And then the precepts then are you could say the background principles against which we can then begin to cultivate our garden. They're really like our garden tools. Understand these garden tools, and we can then plant seeds that give rise to karmas that fruit with blessings, fruit positively. Whereas if we plant negative karmas or unskillful karmas, basically that begins to drop curtains, drop veils down over the and makes it more difficult to access, to know the you could say sort of love of the universe. And because we feel increasingly unloved becomes more and more the case as negative karmas accumulate, and that unlove gives rise to a feeling of being distanced from our essential being, which gives rise to a sense of anxiety, fear, distress. These 5 precepts are faultless gifts, the Buddha said. They will give countless beings freedom from danger, freedom from hatred, freedom from oppression, freedom from distress. And they will bring joy both to oneself and to others. So they are this is the great protecting principle. So what are they? So First one is Panati Pata Vermani Sikapadang Samadhiyami. I undertake the training to refrain from the slaying of living beings. So, as I mentioned earlier, I killed this robin. There was heavy karma associated with that, even though it was just the killing of a robin. It's not a moment that I'm proud of, and the memory of it is painful, it's unsettling, is disturbing. Now, had I done a lot of that, I wouldn't want to be feeling disturbed. I wouldn't want to feel that pain. So I would have more likely than not suppressed a lot of that sensitivity. I would have desensitized myself and had to shut down that part of my being, that part of my sensibility, so as I could just live comfortably and in seeming peace, but I would be skating on thinner ice and not having that deep root into the source of my being. Would never really feel truly at home or at ease in my life or in the universe. Now, it has to be said, just because I killed that bird doesn't mean to say it's an unsurpassable obstruction. I can learn to be what you might call a poison eater, and this is what a lot of practice is about. It's about, the fact is, we've all got a lot of negative accumulated karmas. Doesn't make us bad people. What it does mean to say is that as the fruit, we have to then become responsible to burning them up, which can mean patiently enduring and burning up the karma. We used to say, practice the Dharma, leave the rest up to karma. We just don't know what needs burnt up, what seeds have been planted and what fruit they're going to bear. But as you begin to become more skillful and positive karmas begin to take fruit, then you become increasingly equipped to then be a poison eater of the negative karmas. A poison eater, a symbol for poison eater is a peacock, who turns, and peacocks literally eat poisoned, can eat poison, and then they have, of course, these radiant, incredible, beautiful feathers. And so the idea then is to be a poison eater of karmas. But you need a basis for that. You need, that's perhaps a bit of another story. But what the precepts help us do is they create an alchemical vessel that facilitates this burning and this digesting and this transformation of lead into gold. So don't kill living beings. And it extends to, it's more complicated than that in some ways. When I was with Master Wa, I always remember the night the Iraq war began. I was sitting on a bus with him and he burst into tears. And, this is not something I would have ever thought of or considered, but he said, the reason this war is about to begin, the reason that the world is about to subject itself to this pain is because of the fruition of the karmas that we have accrued in our relationship to animals and the way we treat animals, the way we slaughter animals, millions of animals actually a day, just for food, without consideration for their well-being, without caring for them, without compassion or love for their essential nature. So he was saying, this treatment of animals that is so widespread throughout the world was having this horrible effect on the world at large, and it can go this deep, but very few of us have the eyes to see the way that all of these things are interconnected. You need a great deal of clarity and sensitivity to understand how these, one thing conditions another. But Master Wa, I believe, was seeing something that I certainly didn't have the insight to see. And I think it's a very interesting reflection on that first precept. So second precept is adina dana vermani sikapadang samadhiyami. So the second precept is not to steal from others or to feel desirous of other people's possessions. And again, I created a karma. Remember very, very clearly, I stole a pen from some friends when I was a child. I mean, it was not an expensive pen. It's just, it's just a little bit of plastic. But I remember I wanted it and I stole it. And that memory, again, is an unpleasant memory. It does not create a sense of positive regard about myself when I remember it. So all these little actions, they bear fruit. And, many, many instances where we've stolen in one way or another, little things, taken something out of, if you're in a flat share, maybe, taking a spoonful of honey out of someone's jar or whatever. All of these tiny little boundaries that we cross have consequences. And that's probably enough to be said on the idea of stealing. Third precept is kami sumi chachara vermani sikapadang samadhiyami. So I undertake the training to not commit adultery or sexual misconduct. So this is a way of beginning to respect the boundaries that exist in the relational field. Very important, for those to be respected, because we all know how shit hits the fan when these boundaries are crossed, and there's a lot of pain and distress that gets spun up and put into motion when these boundaries are crossed. So, and also just has to do with the respecting of our own sexuality, not using our sexuality or the sexuality of others, that vital force, not using it in a way that is out of alignment with the heart, the heart's aspiration for deep relationship, meaningful connection. So to understand that, the sexual drive, the sexual energy is a human impulse that is designed to facilitate love between human beings, but not just between human beings, because there is a great eros, there's a great eroticism in this awakening process, where the in a sense, that light of aliveness that we associate with sexuality starts to vibrate and be realized as the essence of all things. It's interior to this object here, and it's interior to every other object in this room, because it's pity or that ecstasy, that joy, is an enlightenment factor. It's a facet of the light of awareness itself. So it's something that needs to be understood and treated respectfully, because there's a great sacredness to it. So what's the fourth precept? It is musawada vermani sikapadang samadhiyami. So I undertake the precept to refrain from engaging in gossip and harmful speech. So when we speak, we're really demanding or requiring that someone else pays attention with their ear, and listens to what we have to say. And in a sense, we're constantly inducting or inducing each other into states of mind. And with speech, it's a very, very difficult precept, this, but with speech, we are continuously planting seeds. With speech mind, that is, in our thinking, we're planting seeds for ourselves. But then when we communicate them to someone else, we're planting seeds into the other person. Now, the other person has a responsibility as to how they receive those seeds. They can either get hooked in, or they can be more like Teflon and can just bounce off. Just depends on the skill with which they listen and with which they hear. But speech is an incredibly powerful and unique facility that we have as human beings, and it's very important that we use it for the benefit of others and plant seeds that bring benefit, that help empower, that help enhance the lives of others, and don't disempower, don't depreciate others, or carry confusion from one place to another. And that we can carry secrets as well, because sometimes we may know something about the life of another person and then think that by telling another friend that secret that we're in some way creating closeness. But this is not real closeness, because it's not really information. It's not really our information to share. So that there's a sort of deceit that comes from gossip. It's much better to try and build relationships on something that is more real and substantial and born of presence to the actual person, and is to do with your connection with the person who's before you, and you're not a carrier of gossip from one place to another, trying to stir things up and just create sort of a certain amount of chaos as a result. It's the fifth precept. Sura Maraya Majapamada Dana Vermanisi Kapadang Samadhyami. So this is not a very popular precept, because what it's asking us to look at is our relationship to alcohol and drugs. It's asking us to refrain from using them. Now, in European culture, where alcohol is so much part of the sort of social standard, it's not something that I hold in judgment over other people. But nevertheless, it's there as a standard. First of all, it's easier to break all the other precepts when we drink, but in all honesty, we have to look at our motivation for drinking. Okay, may oil the wheels of social connection, but when we take a drink, we're really saying, my present state of mind is not ebullient enough, not joyful enough, not fulfilled enough. Therefore, I need to modify it. I need to change it, just as the Buddha mentioned with the parable of the lepers who burn their skin over a brazier. Lepers in India used to burn their skin over a brazier, and the Buddha said because they experience a change in sensation, they feel relieved of their disease. So when we pick up that glass of alcohol, we have to ask ourselves, are we seeking a change in sensation to feel relieved of our disease? And if so, what is that disease? What is our relationship to that disease? How honest is our relationship to that disease? Now, again, I don't sit in judgment here, but nevertheless, these are truths that are unavoidable when it comes to our relationship to drink and alcohol. So you have to make your own determination as to what your relationship to these options to modify or change consciousness to make a change in sensation are. So is it compulsive? Is it a compulsive choice? Or is it a free choice? And the way to find out whether it's a compulsive or a free choice is just not to do it. And then see how you feel when you don't do the thing that you feel is there as an option. When you don't have that glass of wine, then how free are you in that moment? Or then do you feel this kind of compression, this binding, this, screw that, I'm just going to have my glass of wine, just screw that. So it's just like, it's not a free choice, it's a compulsive choice. And that, say, parameter, that has a limitation as to, you're not a poison eater in that moment. You're just choosing not to be a poison eater because you're not eating the darkened karma that is separating you from unconditional joy, unconditional happiness that needs to be ate, that needs to be consumed. So there's precepts then. This alchemical vessel, they exist just as standards for training. They are not like the 10 Commandments. You're not going to be shot down by a bolt of lightning if you break one of them. Now, there's a way in Buddhism that we deal with the breaking of precepts. And the Buddha would often have monks come to him and say, I did this stupid thing, I stole this or did this. And the Buddha would say, that is a really stupid thing. Learn your lesson, don't do it again. This is basically how it works. So in Buddhism, it's really very much about acknowledging that we broke a precept. We forgive ourselves for breaking the precept. We do a review of what the fruits of the breaking that precept feel like. Yes, it's like, okay, I drank 6 glasses of wine last night and this is how I feel the next day. So it feels like this. Felt good at the time, but there's a consequence and the consequence feels like this. Or I caught that fish, I killed that fish. It felt like a rational decision at the time. I like to eat fish, but then when I sit down a month later and I'm sitting quietly, maybe that memory comes back and it feels like it feels, pleasant or unpleasant. You just notice. So acknowledge, forgive, and learn. And in this way we begin to accumulate an understanding of how karma works, how our actions and the consequences of these actions work. And then you start to get a skill, you start to get a feel for, okay, this is how to create a beautiful garden. And as your skill in the accumulation and acquisition of positive karmas grows, builds momentum, and then the power of realization starts to just grow stronger and stronger and stronger until it becomes a force that is so strong that it can culminate in the complete outshining of limitations. And that's a potential that we have as human beings that is not often pointed to or discussed, but it is a real thing. It is a real possibility to deepen to that extent where, this intrinsic radiant light of consciousness begins to transform us emotionally, physically, mentally, until we reach such a point as it starts to, become an identity. I mean, that is something that needs to be upheld as a potential, as a possibility, a lot more. And in terms of being pragmatic, understanding how karma works, how actions have consequences, and how we can begin to watch what these consequences are, how we don't even need to worry about being struck down by a thunderbolt, but we acknowledge, we forgive, and we learn. So in a sense, the responsibility lies entirely with us. We determine the outcome. Nobody else. There's no external force. You know, the causes of karma are also very, very complex. If a piano drops on our head, it may be that in a past life you dropped a piano on somebody's head, or it could be that you just happened to be born on this planet and were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Only very, very, very clear beings can determine what are the causes of certain outcomes, whether it was karmic or just an accident. That's what Buddhas can know. But the Buddha said, if we try to understand that, our heads will explode because it's beyond our comprehension. But the fact is, if we want to be free from pain, we just pull out the arrow. We understand what we can know, and what we can know is, if we do this, it feels this way. If we do that, it feels that way, and then we can make better informed choices in the knowledge that there is a direction of travel that is going to bring about, hopefully, an incredible fruition. Better than ending up in prison, or ending up down the police station, or ending up in a very confusing, painful, and distressing situation. And offering this as a gift, not just to ourselves, but also to others, to the world. And this is how really we can build a better world all together. Okay, so that is that.